So we're back, aren't we? With Giuseppe Verdi's AIDA, that one opera where everyone and their grandmother wants to at least think of doing it. Well, obviously we have a ton of recordings here, and let's go through the ones that I like, the ones that I don't like, and which ones you should get. But of course, before that, we will have to go through our checkpoints first, and here we go. First one we have here, no brainer, is the title role of AIDA, and I've chosen 3 checkpoints for this role. The first of them come in her Act 1 aria, Ritorna Vincitore. The exact line I've chosen is Numi pietà del mio soffrir, which is the final line of the aria. Why I've chosen this, of course, it's very famous for requiring chest voice. The first aria is predominantly chest voice, and of course you want someone, a soprano, that sings the role of AIDA. You want a dramatic soprano that can carry her voice above the ensembles and the big scenes, as well as having the nuance. And for that kind of dramatic soprano, you always want chest voice. Here's a good checkpoint to check whether or not she has, both the nuance and the technique. So, the chest voice, low notes, and you have to be expressive in this line. In English, it's, "Oh gods, have pity on my suffering. There is no hope for my sorrow. Fatal love, fearful love, break my heart and let me die." Very expressive, so you have to have the nuance there while keeping the chest voice. So this is a very important. Here's our second checkpoint. It is from the big aria of AIDA, O Patria Mia, and this is one of the most famous phrases in all of opera, one of the most difficult ones. I think you should know about that. It goes, "O Patria Mia, non ti vedrò mai più," and it goes up to the high C. There are how many high Cs? Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 high Cs in the role of AIDA. This one in her final solo aria is also the last high C in the role, the most difficult one for one reason. It's the top note in a scale. So it goes like this. O patria mia, non ti vedrò mai più, mai più. Non ti vedrò mai più. What's difficult about this is it's exposed. You have to basically bring your voice, a portamento, bring it up to the C, in a scale that's have to be sung very slowly, have to be sung with legato, and all things considered, it's probably the single reason a lot of sopranos didn't dare to do the role of AIDA. Even the best of the best have had disasters on this note, like Nilsson in the 1960 recording, Tebaldi in the video from 1959, Dimitrova was flatting this note on every single occasion. So basically, it's a killer note, and if you come across an AIDA who can do this note properly, you're in very safe hands. I'm not saying that if something really painful happens on this note, it's not an AIDA to listen to. Like I've said, Tebaldi, Nilsson, even Callas on some occasions had big problems with this note. So I'm not saying, "Oh, she flats it or she screams it, it's painful. That must be a bad recording of AIDA." No, because it's almost impossible to find it sung perfectly. But if somehow you find a recording that has the AIDA bringing up to the high C, a perfect on pitch and presumably pianissimo as marked in the score, plus dolce also marked in the score. If she does that, well, then it's an AIDA that you should listen to. So the third and final checkpoint for the title role comes at the end of her duet with Amonasro, also in Act 3. The line I've chosen is O patria quanto mi costi. Again, this is basically a scale that ends with chest voice. It's very expressive, as you can see from the lyrics. O fatherland, what a price I must pay for thee. It's lyrical. It has to be sung with, with sorrow, with utmost expression, and the few chest notes at the end have to be rounded. They shouldn't be ugly. It has to move you. It's a very, very important line in the entire opera, and not many sopranos sing it properly either. So that's one to look out for. So, our second character, we have 2 checkpoints for the tenor role, Radames. First one I've chosen, very, very early on in the opera. It's his big aria, Celeste Aida. The line I've chosen should be a no-brainer. Starts un regal certo and runs until the end. There are 2 B flats in this particular line or lines, and both of them are really hard to sing. The first one, un regal certo sul crin posarti, erget in trono. So it's a jump up an octave. A lot of people can't voice it properly because again, it's a killer tessitura, and suddenly you have to sing that B flat. This is the second one in the aria, actually. There's another one earlier on, but that one is relatively easier. This one, on Erget in trono, is a bit harder, but still not as hard as the final B flat, which most of you should know. Un trono vicino al sol, un trono vicino al sol. That marked morendo, dying. So some tenors interpret that as a diminuendo. Corelli does a diminuendo, and some people interpret that as basically a pianissimo, like Helge Rosvaenge does. One way or another, those tenors like to show off. They like to sing it full voice. I have absolutely no problem with, hearing a tenor sing it at full voice, but you have to hit the note. It should shine if you're not planning to do the morendo anyway. So very important note or notes here. If the Radames nails this aria, you can pretty much make sure that in the rest of the opera he does pretty decent as well. So the second checkpoint for Radames, it's from the Act 3 finale. It's the lines, Io son disonorato per te tradì la patria. And another one at the very end, which is Sacerdote, io resto a te. Why these 2 lines in particular? First one, it's a very vocally challenging one and a psychologically challenging one. Vocally, it has 4 high B flats successively. So obviously a very high tessitura. How you handle those 4 high B flats that comes in succession is a difficult task, because it doesn't reach higher than a B flat in this role, and you suddenly have to sing all of them in one go. Some tenors don't manage even to hold it for the last 1 or 2 B flats. So yeah, vocally challenging, and psychological wise, it's very challenging as well, because Io son disonorato, I am dishonored. For you, I've betrayed my country. So he's in a dilemma between choosing his lover, Aida, or choosing his country, which he is the general of, I believe. Yeah, so you have to hear the interpretation instead of just singing the notes. The second one, Sacerdote, io resto a te. At the very end of the opera, the very end of the third act, And what is challenging about that, again, high notes, it's a high A natural, There is no fermata here, but most tenors hold it for like super long anyway. And again, it's 3 high A's in succession. Sacerdote, arrestuate. And if that tenor holds it, he shows off. Brilliant, and that's what we want to hear. Exciting singing. If he doesn't hold it and still hits the note, okay, he's probably still a decent rudder mess, but you have to hear the dramatic temperament. You have to hear the edge in the voice and the sword-like quality, like someone like a Filippeschi or Mario del Monaco has. So you definitely want to take a look at the Act 3 finale for the role of Radames. So, our third character here, the mezzo-soprano role of Amneris. This one, another no-brainer I've chosen. The end of her famous judgment scene in Act 4. The line is her last lines, which go like this. Empiarrazza, anatema su voi, la vendetta del ciel scenderà, anatema su voi. And these 2 high A's in this line is not, the highest note that she has to sing. She has a couple of B flats in her duet with Radames just before this, but this one she has to hold, and you have to hear the quality of the voluptuousness of the voice. It has to be big, it has to have sufficient chest engagement, and you have to hear the psyche of the role of Amneris, torn between her country and her lover Radames, which you have to hear. The psychology in this opera is quite complex, and the appropriate vocalisms that you have to hear for each character is different. Here for Amneris, this line, you can hear how she curses Ramphis and the priest for sending Radames, which she loves to die. So anatema su voi, a curse on you. You have to hear the angstiness, so to say, and the determination in the character of Amneris. Our final checkpoint is for the baritone, Ammonasdero. Logically, it's from his big scene, which is his duet with AIDA. I've chosen the lines which are Su dunque sorgete. I'm running through to AIDA's lines, and plus his final line, which is Pensa che un popolo vinto straziato. So let me read the lyrics, because these are very important lines in the opera. Firstly, in his first line, it is, "Arise then, soldiers of Egypt, sack and burn our cities, spread terror, rape and death. There is no reign now to your fury," which is just trying to scare AIDA, scare her of the consequences that her country, Ethiopia, will receive if she decides to stick with his lover, Radames, general of Egypt. And AIDA responds, "A padre," our father, and Manasro repulses her, saying, "You call myself my daughter, mia figlia ti chiami." So he goes on to sing this. Flutti di sangue scorrono sulle città dai venti, vedi dai negri vortici si levano le stenti, ti aridare gridano, per te la patria muor. Which in English is, waves of blood are flowing over our vanquished cities. See, from the black waves the dead arise. They point at you and cry, because of you our country dies. How dramatic is that? And of course, a high F sharp, his highest note. There are a few of them in this scene. On gridano, and they cry, which is the first F sharp here. And then after AIDA goes, "Father, have pity," he continues, "A horrid spectre rises in the shadows before us. Tremble, for over your head it lifts its bony arms. It is your mother. Look at her. She is cursing you." So this line, very dramatic, and he's bringing the topic of her mother, Aida's mother. She's dead because of you, and she's looking at you, and she's cursing you. Another F sharp here, extremely dramatic. Tua madre ele, ravisla, a te maledice. She is cursing you, maledice. She curses you. Another F sharp. Not an easy one to sing, of course, but we still have other ones. And then after that, Aida goes, Padrino, a pietà, have pity on me. And then Amonasro sings perhaps the most important line in this opera. Non sei mia figlia, dei faraoni, tu sei la schiava. You are not my daughter, you are the slave of the pharaohs. So basically, he is disowning her. You can imagine the amount of dramaticism you have to have here. At the words, tu sei la schiava, you are the slave. And a good Amonasro must have full-voiced F sharps, the few F sharps we've chosen here, and at the same time has to keep the dramatic quality of this scene going on. It's very difficult to do, and there are not much baritones who can manage to do both at the same time. But we're not finished here. After Aida sings her lines, I am not their slave, do not curse me, you will call me daughter again, for I shall be worthy of my country. Then Amonasro sings, Pensa che un popolo vento straziato per te soltanto risorger può. In English, it's think of the people conquered and suffering will rise again only through you. So, very emotional line. It's about his country, and he begs very passionately to Aida to remember her people. So obviously it has to be sung with sorrow, with emotional quality, especially the F sharp here, which is his last, not his last, but his last in this scene with Aida. It falls on the word vinto, which is conquered, defeated, and you have to hear that F sharp being sung with great sorrow, not penso che un popolo vento straziato. You're not making a point here if you're not trying to fervently beg your daughter. She's not going to be convinced if you just voice it without any emotion. So what you have to do is put a ton of coloring on the word vinto. Pensa che un popolo vento straziato. That sounds better. And of course, very, very emotional and very important scene for Amonasro. And if you can get a good Amonasro, it's already half of the good parts of Aida, I would say. So now, the recordings. As usual, we have 6 categories. First one is good and commercially available recordings. The second one is good and rare recordings. The third one, dark horses, which are overlooked recordings. The fourth one is film or video recordings. The fifth one, commercially available recordings to avoid. And the last one, good arias, scenes, or excerpts of the opera. Of course, we start with our first one, good and commercially available recordings. I've put these in chronological order for each category, so it's easier to find. And we start with one from 1946. It's conducted by Tullio Serafin, conducting the orchestra and chorus of the Teatro dell'Opera di Roma. The title role is sung here by Maria Caniglia, Radames is Beniamino Ghilli, Amneris Ebestignani, Amonasro is Gino Becchi, and the 2 bass roles Ramfis and Il Re are sung by Tancredi Passero and Italo Taio, respectively. Very, very good cast here we have. Caniglia as Aida, I would say she's a bit on the old sounding side. It's not totally convincing as Aida. A princess, not so much. An old matronly woman is more suitable for Caniglia. But her voice, you cannot deny, is very good. Her technique isn't perfect. She flats the high C in the O Patria Mia pretty painfully. It doesn't matter though, because there is dramaticism in her voice, which you do not find in many Aidas. It's not a small voice at all. There is plenty of chest voice and other things that most Aidas are lacking. And the red-hot Italian temperament is what you want. Gili, a bit smaller in terms of voice for Radames, but his Begaria Celestaida is delivered very lyrically. The rest of the role is also sung with red-hot temperament, as we say, which is suitable, not exactly suitable, but is compatible with the role of Radames. Ebestignani, one of the best, if not the best, mezzo-sopranos of all time. As Amneris, can't go wrong. Very, very, very dramatic judgment scene, one of the best I've ever heard, along with the versions of Obrazova and Oralia Dominguez. Gino Becchi is another very good Monazro. You can hear the bass origins of his voice, which provide depth to the role of Monazro, and as well as the more lyrical, rounded side when he has to sing his last line in his duet with Aida. Tancredi Passero and Italo Taio are two very good basses. Tullio Serafin conducts very convincingly here, very Italian style of conducting. Handles the big choruses and marches, ballets, handles that very well. And all in all, very rounded and a very fine recording of Aida. Our second commercially available recording we have here is the only live one in this category, but it is perhaps the most famous recording of Aida of all time. It is from Mexico, with Maria Callas in the title role, Mario del Monaco as Radames, Oralia Dominguez as Amneris, and Giuseppe Taddei as Amonasro, live from 1951 from the Palacio de las Bellas Artes. This is the Aida performance. If you haven't got any recordings of, or haven't listened to any recordings of Aida, go for this one. Without a shadow of a doubt, this is the finest recording of Aida of all time. I tell you why. Maria Callas sings the single greatest performance as Aida here, sung by anyone ever. Oralia Dominguez sings the single best interpretation of Amneris ever in this performance. Giuseppe Taddei sings the single best interpretation of Amonasro ever in this performance. That should be enough. Mario del Monaco, I'm sorry. His Radames is very, very good. He is second only to Corelli in this role. I know that a lot of people would prefer Del Monaco to Corelli as Radames, and I can see why. I'm just a bit biased, I would say. Callas, in her first aria, Ritorna Vincitor, the best interpretation of that aria I've ever heard is definitely from this performance, 1951. The Act 2 finale, everyone knows that famous E-flat. It's even better than the one from 1950, which I'll talk about in the second category, rare and live recordings. But this E-flat here, at the end of the Act 2, which she interpolated, probably the most famous note and the best note that has ever been recorded in the opera history. So yeah, it's amazing. It is probably the most important document of opera that we have on our hands. Why not go for it? Her third act aria, O Patria Mia, the high C is a bit of a struggle for her here. Her best O Patria Mia is from the second night of 1950, which I will mention in the sixth category, the recordings of excerpts. but it is not a bad effort here either. And then after that aria, her duet with Amonasro, Giuseppe Taddei. He is on fire here, like absolutely on fire. You know Taddei for Buffo roles, Mozart roles, but no, his Verdi here, his Amonasro. This is the single best Amonasro that we have ever heard. Wow, he sings with fire. You can really picture him cursing Carlos and throwing her on the stage and all that. And for the very last lines of this duet, he sings with great emotion as well. It's not many that can do both in the same span of like 2 minutes, let's say. Oralia Dominguez, her role debut as Amneris is the single best interpretation of this role that we have ever heard. Without a shadow of a doubt. It's not even close to the other ones, like Stignani. It's not even close to this Amneris. It's amazing. The repetitions that she sings in the recognition scene. Nu mi pietà, nu mi pietà. The chest voice there, wow. And the final line, which I put earlier as the example of this judgment scene. Amazing. Just amazing. Wow, what a performance. The only thing about this performance I don't quite like is the final duet. They're singing it with too much voice, way too much voice. Delmonico and Carlos are still so excited from the act 2 finale where they are just fighting over who's louder, and they carry that on into the final duet, which should be sung with pianissimo, with a lot of nuance, but I don't care. It's an exciting performance of AIDA, and they carry that onto the end. The Monaco Celeste AIDA here is very vocally secure. He delivers ringing top notes here, especially in his duet with AIDA, Por ti rivego. All in all, whether you've heard AIDA or not, or you don't have a disc or something, one way or another, go for it. It's probably the single most famous opera recording ever, and with good reason. It wouldn't make any sense not to go for it. Our third recording here is in studio from 1952. Alberto Erede conducts the orchestra and chorus of Santa Cecilia. AIDA is Renata Tebaldi. Radames is Mario Del Monaco. Amneris Ebe Stignani. Amonasro Altobroti. Ramphis Dario Caselli. And the king is sung by Fernando Corena. Now, Tebaldi's AIDA. Many people think it's bad just because she painfully flats the top C in O Patria Mia every single time. Okay, I don't care, it's one note. Canilia flats it. Nilsson struggled with it. I don't see people calling them bad AIDAs. Tebaldi is an excellent AIDA, up there with Callas. And this is maybe not her best recording of AIDA. Her best is live from 1951 in Rio. Those are excerpts. I will introduce that in the 6th category. But let's talk about this one first. She delivers her first aria, Ritorna Vincitor, very dramatically. Her duet with Delmonico as Radames is of the highest class. Stignani is a very convincing Amneris. I've talked about that. I don't particularly like Aldo Proti as Amonasro. I think it's too barbaric, it's too rough. He is an excellent Rigoletto, but I'm not convinced by his Amonasro. The Monaco in studio, a bit tempered down, but you can still hear the exciting quality to his singing. And Tebaldi here is still the star. Dario Caselli and Corena, both average, but still decent readings of the two bass roles. Erede is a decent conductor as well. The sound is not very good for a studio recording, but regardless, it's not a bad recording of this at all. Then, number 4 in category 1 is from 1955, again in studio. This time the conductor is Perlea, again with the orchestra and chorus of Teatro dell'Opera di Roma. AIDA is Zinka Milanov, Radames Jussi Björling, Amneris Fedora Barbieri, Amonasro is Leonard Warren, Ramphis Boris Christoph, and the king is Plinio Glabassi. Now, Milanov recorded AIDA a lot of times. I will include the other recordings a bit later. And this one is her final recording of AIDA, and it is also in studio. Many have speculated that the studio, the sound engineers, have definitely done something to her recording. Because why? She delivers a impossible pianissimo high C in O Patria Mia that she has never been able to do before. So what if it's edited? It's still her voice, and it's still a gorgeous high C to listen to. The rest of the recording is very well sung as well by Milanov. Her duet with Leonard Warren here is sung with incredible nuance. You can hear more chest voice than you would get in live recordings for some reason. It's a very colorful interpretation of the role. You can hear the shades of color in her voice here that might not be as well captured in live recordings as here. Jussi Björling, a studio artist for sure. He did do Radames live early on in his career, and throughout his career he still did it sporadically. Many would speculate that if he had done Radames in-house, you probably wouldn't hear him. That might be in part true, but this is a studio recording, and you can hear his opulent, marble-like voice as Radames, which you will not regret hearing. Fedora Barbieri, again, a bit too old lady for the role of Amneris, I would say, but it is sung with dramatic intensity, and obviously a lot better than what we would get in the 80s and 90s. This is a top interpretation of the role of Amneris, if not for the innate quality of her voice. Boris Christoph is a bit underwhelming as Ramphis, never been a big fan of him. Glabassi is his decent self as the king. And Yona Perlea, a bit lousy, sometimes in the big sounds, in the choruses and the marches, but still a decent conductor and a decent sounding recording as well. Our final one here is from 1959, conducted by Herbert von Karajan with Vienna Phil. AIDA is again Renata Tebaldi, this time Radames is Carlo Bergonzi, Giulietta Simeonato is Amneris, and Cornel MacNeil is Amonasro. Arnold Van Mill and Fernando Corena take up the two bass roles, and the priestess is sung by Eugenia Ratti, the messenger is sung by the great Piero de Palma. So every one of them in this cast is a major star. Tebaldi is a bit more vocally mature, with more shades of mezzo coloring in her voice here than her early AIDAs, which is here. She is a bit tired sometimes, I would say, but there is this gorgeous thick vocal coloring that you don't get in her earlier, fresher AIDAs, and it is a pleasure to listen to. Bergonzi's Radames, again similar to Björling, a bit more on the smaller side, but very nuanced, very lyrical, if not lacking a bit of edge in the dramatic Act 3 scenes. Giulietta Simeonato as Amneris. She has had better recordings of her Amneris, but this one is not bad either. Very red-hot, straightforward interpretation of the role. Cornel MacNeil is very, very well sung Amonasro. A bit too vocal at times, I would say, but all things considered, a rounded and a very, very fine interpretation of the Ethiopian king. And the two basses here and the other two supporting singers are in decent form here. Karajan, I have never been a fan of Karajan's Erede, but he does conduct with restraint here. Not big sounds, not ugly sounds, brings out the more lyrical side of Verdi's score. Now our second category, good and rare recordings. Our first one is from 1950, again from Mexico, Palacio de las Bellas Artes. This time the conductor is Guido Picco. AIDA is still Maria Callas, Radames is Kurt Baum, Amner is Giulietta Simeonato, and Amonasro is sung by Robert Tweed. Now, this E-flat here in 1950 at the end of Act 2 is not as loud as the one in 1951, but we only get to hear the 1951 E-flat because of the 1950 performance. Here, Kurt Baum has been pissing Callas off by holding the high notes as long as possible and just ignoring the conductor, ignoring everyone else, and Callas is pissed. And in this performance, after Act 1, Simeonato, the Amneris, was asking Callas to take the E-flat for her, so that Kurt Baum could learn a bit of humility, so to say. So Callas went ahead and asked the conductor for permission. He let her do it. Callas sung the E-flat, a very, very great E-flat as well, just not as good as the 1951 version. And Kurt Baum was pissed. Boy, was he pissed. He vowed to never sing with Callas again. And the next week, they sang again. Anyways, Callas, very, very amazing story behind that, but her singing is no less intriguing. The Ritorno Vincitor here, second only to her 1951 version. Her Patria Mia here, now she nails the Dolce high C this time, but it's still not quite pianissimo enough. This was 30th May. 4 days later, on the 3rd of June, she sang a pianissimo, and that was also recorded. And I will put that in the 6th category, good recordings of excerpts, because that wasn't recorded full. Back to this recording though, Kurt Baum is a good Radames. I wouldn't say he's bad, but he has pitch problems. Very straightforward, sword-like voice, kind of like Filippeschi, but a bit heavier, a bit more bulkier, I would say. All in all, still a decent Radames. Simeonato's Amneris I've talked about. She is much better here live than in studio. Robert Weed's Amonasro I would find a bit lacking in roundedness, a bit too edgy, I would say, for the role of Amonasro, but he is a good baritone without a doubt. The two basses here are Nicola Moscona and Ignacio Rufino. Both are decent. They sing their roles, they deliver their roles accordingly, and it's a good recording, just not as good as in 1951. Now, our second recording in this category, a bit rarer. It's from the Metropolitan Opera from 1950, conducted by Emil Cooper. The title role is interpreted by Ljuba Velic. Radames is Ramon Vinay, Amner is Margaret Harshaw, Amonasro is Robert Merrill, Jerome Hines sings the role of Ramphis, and Lorenzo Alvari is the king. Velic's AIDA. It's a bit of a dilemma for me, because on one hand, AIDA is supposed to be a young princess that makes, Radames fall in love with her. But at the same time, AIDA is a mature princess, because she knows the consequences of her country if she decides to stick with her lover Radames, and she ultimately decides to prioritize her country over her love. Ljuba Velic obviously is a noted interpreter of the role of Salome. Salome in that opera, the character is very spoiled, and she seems to bring that temperament over here as AIDA as well. So it's a bit weird listening to a young princess that is supposed to be how it is, but also this kind of acidic quality that doesn't make sense in the context of AIDA. Anyway, Radames is Ramon Vinay here. I've always insisted that he was a natural baritone, which had the high notes of a tenor. And why not? Why not do tenor repertoire when you have the capability of doing so? His Radames here I would like Delmonico's approach. I mean, Delmonico's voice over Vinay's voice as Radames, also as Othello. But here, his baritonal timbre does give off the impression that he is a warrior, although not a more straightforward, a more fearless one as you would want from Delmonico. Still, he is very vocally secure here. His high notes are all there, and that's very impressive for a singer born a baritone. Margaret Harshaw, a mezzo turned soprano, is still in her mezzo years here, and her Amneris, if a bit too lyrical, is a very good reading of the role. Robert Merrill as Amonasro, he is one of the only baritones who could sing fiercely and softly, gently, movingly at the same time. And that's what you want in Amonasro, isn't it? Merrill, Bastianini, Tadei, all those baritones that I've said have to fulfill the categories of fierce roles with moving arias. Amonasro is one of them, and Merrill does the role perfectly. Hines is an excellent Ramfez, not so much for Alvarez, Il Re, but all in all, very precious recording, a very equal recording as well, if I would say so. The third one is from 1953. John Barbirolli conducts the orchestra and chorus of the Covent Garden Royal Opera House. Aida is Maria Callas, Radames Kurbaum, Giulietta Simeonato is Amneris. All three of these coming from the 1950 performance. This time, Jess Walters sings Amonasro, Giulio Neri sings Ramphis, and Michael Langdon is the king. Joan Sutherland makes a cameo in her early career as the priestess. Now, Callas doesn't interpolate the E flat here anymore, with good reason. But she still sings on the level that she does in 1951 for her big arias and scenes. This is not any worse than the previous two Callas live recordings that I've talked about. It is still a voice in very good form with dramatic temperament without, painful high notes that we would hear in her 1955 studio, which I haven't included here because it's average at best. Anyway, Callas Bauman Simeonato we've talked about. Jess Walters is a very fine Amonasro. He has a warm voice with the suitable amount of bite in the more declamatory passages. Giulio Neri is a very fine Ramphis. He is a very fine bass that unfortunately died too early. And Sutherland delivers her solo passage as the priestess very convincingly and lyrically as well. Barbirolli here takes a bit of a slower tempi in the big marches and dances, but in this smaller orchestrations, he does bring out the romantic side, the more lyrical side of Verdi's score here. A very good recording, if not for a bit of a damaged sound. Next then, we find ourselves in the same year 1953, but this time in Teatro di San Carlo di Napoli. Tullio Serafin is again the conductor. Aida is Renata Tebaldi, Radames Gino Peno, Amneris Ebestignani, Amonasro is Ugo Savarese, and Ramphis is Giulio Neri. Now, I've said that Tebaldi's best Aida was 1951 at Rio, but that isn't a complete recording. This is her best complete Aida. In these two recordings, these are the only recordings of Aida in which she hits the high C perfectly. And she does so here. Perfect. The first aria, Ritorno Vincitor, sung with a lot of dramatic intensity, more so than in studio, for obvious reasons. Gino Peno is a very, very good Radames indeed, if not a bit cardboard in, the interpretation. He is a very dramatic, straightforward, the correct amount of edge in his voice, and a very good tenor voice, just suitable for Radames. I've talked about Stignani's Amneris. Ugo Savarese is a bit too unrefined here for Amonasro. He is a good voice, that is suitable in doing more barbaric, unrefined roles like Jack Rance, his recording of Fanciulla I Adore. But here as Amonasro, it's a bit too wild for me and not enough pensiveness, so to say, in his final line. In the duet with Aida, Giulio Neri and Ebestignani I've already talked about. The sound here is a bit poor, but Serafin still brings out the climaxes and the big sounds of this score. The final one in this category is from 1963 with the Vienna Phil. In the Vienna Staatsoper, the conductor is Lovro von Matacic. Title role is interpreted by Leontin Price. Radames is Dimitar Uzunov. Amneris is Giulietta Simeonato. And Amanazro is Ettore Bastianini. Ramfis is Walter Kreppel, and the king is Ludwig Welter. Now, Leontin Price's Aida is one that a lot of people love. Not me, but I do think that Aida is her best role. She is in good form here. I would say that she recorded better live than in studio, because somehow in studio the distortions of the sound engineers made her voice even more masky and more, inwards than we hear live. Here she sings with a great deal of nuance, with a great deal of emotion. Her vocal flaws I will put aside here because it is a convincing interpretation of the title role. Dimitar Uzunov as Radames, very sharp, sword-like voice. If not for a bit of a wobble in the middle, it would be a very good Radames voice. But that wobble is a bit, it's not pleasant to listen to, so to say. Simeonato is a bit past her prime here, but she still delivers a very emotionally, psychologically convincing Amneris, if not a bit not informed vocally. Bastianini's Amanascio is obviously the star here, because, again, he is probably the one of the only basses who can sing wild and emotional at the same time. And you should know that Bastianini is my favorite baritone, and I can say that he is the best baritone to have ever graced the stage. His Amonasro here is top class, absolutely amazing. Listen to his duet with Leontin Price. It is one of the finest recordings of this Amonasro Aida scene that I've ever heard. Lovro von Matacic is a very good conductor in the German repertoire. I've never been convinced by his Italian readings, and that is the same case here. We move on to our third category, which are dark horses, namely overlooked recordings that people don't usually pay a lot of attention to. The first one here is from 1928, conducted by Carlos Sabajno with the orchestra and chorus of La Scala. Aida is Dusolina Giannini, Radames Aureliano Pertile, Amneris is Irene Minghini Cataneo, and Amonasro is Giovanni Inchileri. Giannini, Dusolina Giannini, is a very underrated dramatic soprano. I don't know why she is forgotten nowadays. She is a very good Aida here as well. She sings with chest voice, she sings with nuance. It's your typical old school soprano voice, but with much more nuance and interpretation than we usually hear. Aureliano Pertile as Radames. What a voice, I mean. You should know Pertile as one of the best tenors of his time, and indeed of all time, and his Radames, very convincing. You have the sword quality, the warrior quality, but also the romantic quality of the man in love with Aida. Minghini Cataneo, another very underrated singer, this time mezzo-soprano. She delivers a very convincing Amneris here. It is vocally solid, interpretationally very convincing as well. Giovanni Inchileri recorded for another 30 years, and here he's still very young, but he has the temperament needed for an Amonasro. All in all, an old recording, but a very good one. Our second one here is From 1938, conducted by Joseph Keilberth, with the orchestra and chorus of the Stuttgarter Radio. AIDA is Margarete Teschenmacher, Radames is Helge Rosvainge, Amneris is Inger Karen, Amnazaro George Hahn, and Ramfis is Ludwig Weber. It is sung in German. Now, Teschenmacher, another soprano, which I have no idea why she's forgotten. She is excellent. She's very, very good here as AIDA. It is on the level as Tebaldi's AIDA, I would suggest. In the O Patria Mia, the big aria, she does the high C effortlessly, perfectly, dolce, pianissimo, all you want. And at the same time, she sounds young, like a fresh voice, young princess, with the nuances for the suffering, for the sorrow of the role, with the dramaticism for the internal struggle of the role, and the big voice to cover the entire orchestra and ensemble in the triumphal scene. All in all, I don't know why her AIDA is not more talked about. Helge Rosvainge as Radames here, in his aria Celeste AIDA. He is the only tenor I have ever heard do the final note as written, which is morendo, dying away. Corelli interprets that as a diminuendo, which I have no issue with at all, but here he is using, pianissimo. It is almost falsettone, a lost technique nowadays. The B flat is gorgeous. It is something that you want to listen to over and over again. And wow, what a reading of the role, Radames. The big parts, his duet with AIDA and Neris are sung with very sword-like qualities of voice. His lines like Io son disonorato are sung with the appropriate emotion and internal struggle. It's not something you can listen to every day. Inger Karen, George Hahn, and Ludwig Weber deliver their roles very well as well. I wouldn't say it's one of the best ones we've heard, but all things considered, it's still above average, and it is a very, very good recording. The third inclusion in our third category is not a single recording, but three related ones. These three are from 1952, 53, and 54 respectively, with Fausto Cleva conducting the orchestra and chorus of the Met Opera, and also sharing Zinka Milanov in the title role of AIDA. In the 52 version, Delmonico is Radames, Nell Rankin is Amneris, Leonard Warren is Amonasro, and Jerome Hines is Ramfis. In 1953, her Radames was again Delmonico, but this time Amneris was Blanche Thebaum. Amonasro this time was George London, and Jerome Hines again was Ramfis. In 1954, however, Delmonico was no longer her Radames. It was replaced by Kurt Baum. Fedora Barbieri is her Amneris this time, and Leonard Warren returns as Amonasro. Hines is still the Ramfis. Now, Milanov's three live AIDAs from this period. 52 is better than 53 is better than 54 in terms of vocal form, which is logical, but all of them showcase her in great form. It's still a big voice, it's still lyrical in the parts where it has to be lyrical. She still has gleaming top notes, the gorgeous marbly quality in the middle voice, and all of these are exciting interpretations of the title role. Delmonico in the 52 recording, I would say, is slightly better in terms of vocal form than the 51 in Mexico. Not so much the 53 recording, but he still sings very well there. 54, we have Kurt Baum. I've talked about his Radames. It is not much better here. In terms of the Amnerises, Nell Rankin and Blanche Thebaum are not ones that convince me that whole lot in terms of interpretation and voice, probably because I'm spoiled by the likes of Simeonato and Dominguez, but nonetheless, it's still, vocally speaking, it's still good interpretation. However, Fedora Barbieri, I've talked about too much of an old woman voice for me. Leonard Warren, his Amonasro, same as Merrill and Bastianini, is one that can sound wild and emotional at the same time. And here, live, he's more unrestrained, more wild than his one in studio under Perlea, which I've talked about earlier. But he has to sing with more voice here, so maybe a little bit deducting on the emotional part of the role. Jerome Hines, a very vocally solid Ramphis. Fausto Cleva reached the score very, very expertfully as well. And I would say, all in all, these recordings are of high quality, and if you're a big Milanov fan, you should go for them. Our fourth recording in the Dark Horses category might be one that might surprise quite some of you. That's the only reason it's called a Black Horse, isn't it? It's from the Vienna Staatsoper, conducted by Riccardo Muti from 1973. AIDA is Gwyneth Jones, Radames Placido Domingo, Amneris is Viorica Cortez, Amonasro is Eugene Holmes, and Ramphis is Bonaldo Giaiotti. The king is sung by Tugomir Frank. Muti is an excellent conductor in terms of Italian repertoire, and his reading of AIDA is one of my favorites, absolute favorites. Live, big sounds, exciting sounds are all there. Gwyneth Jones as AIDA, 1973, she was about to take Brünnhilde. She did her first Brünnhilde in 1974. Does she still have the vocal abilities for AIDA? Yes, she does. She was an excellent Verdi sopranos. Dare I say, one of the best Verdi sopranos ever, from the 60s to the early 70s. And this was perhaps her last great recording in the Verdian repertoire. Her High C in O Patria Mia. What a pianissimo, dolce, all that you want here as AIDA. You think of Gwyneth Jones as a massive voice that just blasts through things without mercy, but you wouldn't expect her to pull out a pianissimo high C out of nowhere in one of the most difficult notes ever for a Verdian soprano. And she does that. Incredible. Placido Domingo as Radames here, not in great form. He suffers from nasality here, something that happens once in a while in his early 70s recording, but predominantly exists in his recordings from the late 70s and onwards. This is one of his worst nights. He is a bit nasal here, but he still sings without too much of an issue, if not the nasality just messes with your ears. Anyway, Viorica Cortez as Amneris, a bit on the lighter side. I wouldn't say that she's an undeveloped soprano. She is a mezzo, but not a terribly dramatic mezzo, but it's still acceptable, I would say. Eugene Holmes is Amonasro. What an Amonasro. I have no idea. Absolutely no idea why. Eugene Holmes is basically unheard of nowadays. He is an excellent Amonasro. He has a rounded voice. He has the barbaric quality in the, loud and declamatory passages. He has an amazing mezzo di voce and emotional quality in his last lines in the duet with AIDA. And all in all, a very good baritone, if not a bit restrained at times. But it is still a very, very glorious voice, and I have no idea why he's not famous, or at least, being mentioned nowadays. Giaiotti is a great Ramphis. Tugomir Frank is okay as the king, and all in all, very surprisingly pleasant recording here. Now, Our last inclusion is from the next year, 1974. Again, Riccardo Muti is on the podium, but this time it is in studio with the New Philharmonia Orchestra. AIDA is Montserrat Caballé, Domingo is Radames again, Fiorenza Cosotto is on Neris, Piero Capuccilli is Amonasro, Nikolai Khairov is Ramphis, Luigi Roni the king, and Nicola Martinucci, a future great Radames, is the messenger here. Now, Muti in studio. He never, was a particularly fond of studio recording. He did it anyway, and this was one of his exceptional studio recordings. He conducts with dramatic intensity, with the correct accents, with the correct big sounds, especially in the duet of Amonasro and AIDA. It's explosive. It's not something that you get often in the reading of AIDA's score. Montserrat Caballé is a small voice for the role of AIDA for sure. You do hear that live, she struggled with the role a lot. She did not even sing the high C properly, something that she usually managed to do, likewise in Trovatore, but she could not handle the role live, that is for sure. In studio, there is an advantage though, and she makes use of that advantage to the very extreme, and so she basically leaves only a very, very thin thread of voice for the top C in O Patria Mia. I don't think it is edited like the Milanov one, because I know that she could for sure pull that off in 1974. But anyway, very nuanced reading, especially O Patria Mia and the final duet with Placido Domingo, who is pleasantly well sung here. Not a lot of nasality going on at all, and with nuance. The final duet with Caballé, both of them pull off those otherworldly diminuendos on the high B flats, and it is an amazing recording. Piero Capuccilli is one of my favorite baritones when it comes to moving lyrical arias. Amonasro does not include a lot of that, but for his line "Penso che un popolo vinto straziato," the final line of his duet with AIDA, it is amazing. That F sharp on vinto, sung with so much emotion. It is a very moving interpretation of Amonasro. Khairov is one of my favorite basses, if not the favorite, the best bass, along with Cesare Siepi. His Ramphis here is very well sung as well. All in all, great recording. I think I failed to mention Cosotto here. Never been a fan. She doesn't sing particularly well here either. More so an undeveloped soprano, but no, not the material for Amneris. For our fourth category, video recordings or films. There are, surprisingly, a lot of these that I could choose from, and I chose 5 of them, again in chronological order. So we start from 1949 with the NBC Symphony Orchestra, conducted by the one and only Arturo Toscanini. AIDA is Ervanelli, Radames Richard Tucker, Amneris is Eva Gustafsson, Amonasro is Giuseppe Valdengo, Norman Scott is Ramphis, and Teresa Stitch Randall makes a cameo as the priestess here. This was recorded in concert. Ervanelli is a bit towards the smaller side of AIDA, a smaller voice for her time, but it is sung with lyricism. It is sung with nuance, although lacking a bit in excitement when it comes to the triumphal scene, the big scenes where she has to sing fortissimo. She doesn't possess that kind of excitement. Richard Tucker, however, in his early years here, in the 40s, hasn't yet developed a full spinto voice as he would in the late 60s and 70s, but here, nearing the 50s, he has a gorgeous, full lyric tenor voice, with the suitable sword-like quality to penetrate the orchestra as well. And his Radames is a very good one. Eva Gustafsson, a bit, underwhelming as a Neris. Again, a small voice, not one that I particularly adore. And Giuseppe Valdengo as a Monazro. Again, the smaller, more lyrical side of Amonazro's. That was Toscanini's preference. We couldn't do anything about it because he is Toscanini and he is perhaps the greatest conductor of all time. But who knows? Valdengo as Amonazro here. It is famous, his stories with Toscanini during the rehearsals for this concert. But anyway, I'm still not completely convinced. But his vocalism is good. It's just the innate instrument that isn't, quite wild and unrestrained enough for the early parts of the role of Amonazro. Toscanini is Toscanini. He conducts marvelously with restraint, with tempi that are well regulated, under control, but not foursquare and boring. The accents at the right place are there. He could make big voices, big sounds, big chorales, and all of that is here because he is Toscanini. Our second one is from 1961, conducted by Franco Capuana with the NHK Symphony Orchestra. Gabriella Tucci interprets the title role of Aida, Mario Del Monaco is the Radames, Giulietta Simeonato is Amneris, Aldo Proti is Amonazro, and Paolo Washington is Ramphis. Tucci, I like to think her as a full lyric soprano, so, it would be a bit of a challenge to sing Gilda from Rigoletto and Aida on alternating nights. That was what she did in Tokyo anyway in 1961. But her Aida is sung with a very gorgeous lyrical quality. The nuance is there, maybe a bit undervoiced when it comes to the Act 2 finale and big choruses like that. But she does not get drowned by Del Monaco in the duet with Radames. Talking about that, Del Monaco is a bit past his prime in terms of warrior roles like Radames here, but he still delivers his role with appropriate vocality, with the strong vocalisms, a solid voice. All of that is still here. Simeonato, 1961, I would consider one of her last years in her prime. And she is magnificent here as Amneris. She still delivers the kind of red-hot Italian quality, the voluptuousness, the determination that she displays in the 50 and 53 recordings with Callas, and we can see that on video here, and we can see for our own. Aldo Proti, Amonazro, I've said why I'm not a fan. Paolo Washington is a weak bass. Capuana is okay here, but the orchestra is a bit underwhelming. All things concerned, it's a good historical document though, to see how Tucci could deal with Gilda and Aida on the same stage. Our third one here is from 1966, conducted by Franco Capuana in the Arena di Verona. Lila Kencher is Aida, Carlo Bergonzi Radames, Fiorenza Cosotto Amneris, Anselmo Golzani Amonazro, and Bonaldo Geotti is Ramphis. Before I go into this recording, I would like to mention that there's another one from Arena di Verona from 1963, also with Hencher as Aida, with video recording, but I didn't choose that one because the 66 has much more historical value, and I'll go tell you why right now. Leila Hencher's mother was dying when she sang these few Aidas in 1966 at Verona. She said that she couldn't because she could only take one day off on her performances. Then her mother died after her first night there. And after her first night, she flew to Istanbul for her mother's funeral. Her brother, during the funeral, told her to stop with her crocodile tears because she wasn't there when her mother needed her the most. After that funeral, she immediately flew back to Verona and delivered this absolutely emotional AIDA. The historical context is there, the value is there, the singing is also there. Hencher's AIDA is amazing, is absolutely amazing. She is one of the few voices that could do AIDA through to like Lucia de Lammermoor as well. And she brings the kind of lyrical nuance that you would get in a Lucia here, brings it here to AIDA, and she sings it with gentleness. She puts the nuance where it needs, and she floats her beautiful pianissimi. All in all, she is an amazing AIDA, and given the context, given the emotional toughness that she carried through, it is a very remarkable reading of the role. Bergonzi's Radames I've talked about, Kozotto's Aneris I've talked about, Giotti's Dranvis I've talked about, Colzani's Amonastro. Anselmo Colzani is a baritone that I love in villain roles. He, absolutely nailed those villain roles like Jack Rance and Barnaba. Amonastro is not a villain, and for that reason, I don't think his vocalisms is, too idiomatic for Amonastro, and that's why I'm not fully convinced by his interpretation of the role. But just for the sake of Hencher, go for it. Now, our fourth recording here is from 1968, from the Covent Garden, conducted by Edward Downes. Gwyneth Jones is again AIDA, Charles Craig is Radames, Grace Bumbry is Amneris, John Shaw sings Amonastro, Joseph Rouleau is Ramphis, and the King is sung by David Kelly. This one, I've talked about Jones AIDA, but I should add the remark that she does not sing the high C pianissimo here. I don't care. It's still a very, very good interpretation of AIDA nonetheless. Charles Craig is a very underrated dramatic tenor. He is an excellent Othello, he is an excellent Andrea Chenier, and he is here an excellent Radames. He sings all the top notes with full voice, kind of like a vocal quality similar to Vinay or Pier Miranda Ferraro's. Very, very Stentonian voice. It is amazing. It is a very, very well sung Radames here. Grace Bumbry's Amneris has the kind of a nervousness to it that you want to hear in Amneris' internal mental struggle, and Grace Bumbry delivers it very, very well here. John Shaw as Amonastro, not fully convinced, but he does sing the wild parts quite unrestrained. It is good reading of the role. Downes is nothing special, the rest of the cast is nothing special as well, but for Jones, Craig and Bumbry, this is a very good recording, and it's on video, it's live, you can see how they acted as well. The last one in this category, this is a recording that you should be familiar with. It's 1985, conducted by James Levine at the Metropolitan Opera. Leonton Price is AIDA, James McCracken is Radames, Fiorenza Cosotto on Nervis, Simone Estes is Amonastro, John McCurdy is Ramphis, and Robert Nagy is the messenger. Why you should know about this? This was Price's last performance at the Metropolitan. After 24 years of singing at the Metropolitan, she was the soprano there. She was the star, and this was her last performance in fittingly in her beloved and most acclaimed role as well of AIDA. Price, you can't lie that she is not in good vocal form here. It is at this point already a thin and a voice that is lacking in core, I would say. Don't let that, affect the importance and the value of this performance. She sings with so much emotion here, and you can know why. She is saying farewell to, the audience that she has been singing to for 24 years, and the audience that has treasured her like the treasure of America. this is her last performance, you can just imagine the emotion she has here, singing the words "Non ti vedrà mai più," and exactly on that phrase, she still manages to pull off an amazing dolce high C in her last performance at the Met. It takes determination to do that, and you just know that she's singing her soul out here. After that performance of O Patria Mia, the applause lasted for 3 minutes. She was crying. The camera was, on her face the whole time. Those 3 minutes are incredibly emotional, and if you don't feel anything looking at that, there's something wrong with you. After that 3 minutes, Simon Estes comes in as Amonasro, and he sings the hell out of the role, man. Estes has a big, voluminous voice, a imposing one that strikes fear in hearts, and that is what Amonasro is. He is the king of Ethiopia, and he is here to warn and to convince her daughter Aida to save the country. I would say that Simon Estes is lacking a bit in vocal acting, as in his voice is a bit too cardboard. There's not much interpretation going on here, but he makes up for that with his voice alone, because it's already so imposing, so booming, the voice alone. And it is quite the Amonasro. Again, Price in that duet with Amonasro sings with incredible emotion. The chest voice there, every note is sung with, nuance, with emotion, and it is an amazing performance. McCracken and Cazotto, I don't like either, but just for the sake of it, McCracken is too dry a voice. Cazotto in the 80s is already reverting back to the undeveloped soprano that she once was. Price alone, the historical value of this recording, I would say that this is the most, artistically valuable performance of Aida that we can find out there. I don't care about her vocal shape here. Her Aida, Leontine Price here is absolutely amazing. You can just look at how she acts, look at how she sings, look at her reaction to the audience, endless applause, and it is a life-changing recording, I would dare say. So now, to recordings to avoid. The first one might take you by a bit of surprise. It's conducted by Giuseppe Morelli in 1953 as the soundtrack to a film. Aida was Renata Tebaldi, Radamés is Giuseppe Campora, Amneris is Ebestignani, Amonasro is Gino Pechi, and Ramphis is Giulio Neri. Look at that cast, it's amazing. The singing here is also amazing. Then why don't get it? Because this performance of Aida has been cut disfiguratively. It's the soundtrack to a film, with Sophie Loren acting as Aida, with under Tebaldi's voice. Because it's a film, it is never, adhering to the score, and they just cut here, cut there, and then cut everywhere, and it no longer looks like the score of Aida. A lot of the best parts of Verdi's score is cut away, just for the sake of being a film. And no matter how good the singing is, I just can't listen to an Aida that is 1 hour and 15 minutes long when the entire opera is over 2 hours 30. No, don't get it, because that isn't Aida, it's excerpts of Aida. Why? The second recording we have here is conducted by George Schulte from 1961 in studio with the orchestra and chorus of Teatro dell'Opera di Roma. Aida is Leontine Price, Radamés John Vickers, Amner is Rita Gore, Amonasro Robert Merrill, Ramphis is Giorgio Tozzi, and the king is Plinio Culabassi. A lot of people consider this recording to be the best recording of Aida. They're simply wrong. Why? The singing isn't the problem here. Schulte is. He is one of the worst conductors I've heard. The accents he plays at all the wrong places. He thinks that conducting loud means conducting dramatically, but as a matter of fact, he's just blasting the brass and the percussion and just disfiguring the music, and there is no nuance to be heard. Verdi's score isn't meant to be just blasted vulgarly, no, and that's what Schulte did to the score. It is quite honestly a very, very big disappointment given the cast. Leonton Price as Aida, I've talked about how the studio engineers, the sound engineers, make her sound incredibly masky. She almost sounds like a countertenor sometimes in her studio recordings, and she didn't record well in studio. This isn't an exception. If you love Leonton Price's Aida, just go for the one with Matacic or the farewell one. John Vickers as Radames. I've never been a big fan of Vickers either. How should I put it? It's a dry voice. There isn't much acting going on, and more often than not, he struggles with his top notes, and he just cheats his way out of that by singing it half voice or pretending to be a pianissimo, when instead he's just whispering it. Rita Gore as Amneris, a bit more, French style mezzo, a bit more, a dark, a voluptuous voice, but not so much straightforward, red hot Italian mezzo singing that you would want in Amneris. Meryl Zamanazzo is magnificent here, as I've already talked about. Tozzi is a more lyrical, not enough depth for Ramphis, I would say. But it doesn't matter. Schulte ruins the entire recording anyway. Don't get this one. The next one is from 1967, conducted by Zubin Mehta with the orchestra and chorus of the Roma Opera. Now, I wouldn't call this a bad recording. It's not bad at all. I would just recommend you to avoid it because it's extremely underwhelming. Let's look at the cast. Aida is Birgit Nilsson, Radames Franco Corelli, Amneris Grace Bumbry, Amonasdro Mario Sereni, and Ramphis is Bonaldo Giaiotti. Why avoid it then when it literally has the best Radames ever and one of the best Amnerises ever, plus one of the greatest dramatic sopranos ever, Birgit Nilsson? It's simple, it's in studio, and it's underwhelming as hell. Birgit Nilsson, a very good dramatic soprano voice, but with that, I mean in the sense of Wagner and Strauss. Aida, she is just too cold for the role of Aida. She does not resemble the Ethiopian princess, which is willing to, sacrifice her love for her country and at the end die with her lover together. No, she doesn't remind you of that. Just the nature of the voice is too cold, and it's not enough. It's not enough for Aida, and she would be much better singing her other princess, the Princess of China, executing all the men that she sees. That's way more suitable for her. Franco Corelli as Radames. He sings the best recording of Celliste Aida ever, and starts off this recording with that amazing aria. The diminuendo on the B flat at the end is impeccable. But after that, he just disappears. Why? Because it's studio, and the studio did not record the proper, sword-like quality, nobility in his sound. No, it did not record it properly. And Zubin Mehta's conducting doesn't help because it isn't, it isn't big, it isn't small, it's just there. So it doesn't help enhance Corelli's value as well as in studio. Grace Bumbry as Amneris. Another issue here is that her parts as Amneris were recorded a few months after the completion of the entire recording and pasted onto it. So there are interpretational differences between the role of Amneris and the other ones and the rest of the recording. It's not homogeneous at all. It's weird. And Mario Sereni's Amonasro. I love Sereni in, lyric roles like Ping from Turandot, like Lescaut from Puccini's Manon Lescaut, and like Silvio from Pagliacci. But Amonasro, no, anything beyond Silvio is not for him, because he doesn't have what it takes to sound like a baritone, like a bad guy. He doesn't sound like that, and he just forces his voice to sound ugly when he tries to attempt something heavier like Amonasro di Luna and stuff like that. His Amonasro is not good at all. All things considered, it's just very underwhelming, because look at the cast and you'd be very tempted to get this recording, or at least listen to it. But from what I've heard and from what you're gonna hear, it's not as good as you would expect it to be. Our next recording to avoid is from 1970, conducted by Erede Leinsdorf with the LSO London Symphony Orchestra. AIDA is Leonton Price, Rames Placido Domingo, Amneris Grace Bumbry, Amonasro is Cheryl Milnes, and Ranfis is Ruggero Raimondi. Price, same issue with the Schulte recording. She did not record well in studio. Domingo, I mentioned that he recorded well in the 74 studio version under Muti. Not here. He sounds nasal here. Probably because of the sound engineering or other reasons, but he just does not sound pleasing here as Radames. Grace Bumbry, her wildness and the kind of nervous, sensitive quality in her voice is inhibited here under studio conditions, and Cheryl Milnes is not a great Amonasro because, from what I can tell, he just does not have the presence of a king. He could be a very good, evil character like Scarpia or the Conte di Luna, where it is a, power abusing kind of noble quality. But no, he's the king here, and he is the one with the correct moral values here, and he does not have what it takes to sound like that. He does sound a bit wild. He does have that kind of unrestrained quality when it comes to his duet with AIDA, but again the end, the emotional line that he has to deliver with sorrow, it's not there at all. Ruggero Raimondi is hardly a bass. He sounds like a lyric baritone, and he should not be doing any bass roles at all, not including Ramphis. And Leinsdorf is a great conductor. He conducts with dramatic intensity, and he does well here in studio as well. But it's just, all things considered, it's underwhelming. Like the Mezza performance, it is underwhelming, and no, I wouldn't recommend this. Now, our final recording to avoid is from 1981, conducted by Abbado with the orchestra and chorus of La Scala. AIDA is Katia Ricciarelli, Radames Placido Domingo, Amneris is Elena Obrazova, Amonasro is Leon Ducci, Ramphis is Nikolai Khayrov, and the king is Ruggero Raimondi. Firstly, Katia Ricciarelli, I've talked about in the Tosca video that she was a very, very good lyric soprano when she started out, including her Desdemona with Delmonico is very well sung. But once, Karajan and Abbado, these kind of conductors that prefer small voice singers, once they sign her up for Tosca, AIDA here, and even Turandot later, her voice is completely ruined. Because a lyric soprano, a very beautiful lyric soprano voice, just couldn't handle these kind of tessitures and these kind of weights in terms of the soprano roles. AIDA is not an exception, so she resorts to screaming through the role. Not good at all. Placido Domingo in the 80s is pretty much finished, and his Radames here is pretty awful as well. Obrazova is one of my favorite Amnerises. She had a wild, absolutely wild voice. She had very, very good chest voice, but she did not record well in studio just because of the size, the wildness of the voice. All of these are inhibited by the studio conditions, And so if you want Obrazovas and Neris, go for any other recording that is not in studio, and it would be better than this one. Leonucci as Amonasro, probably one of the worst casting decisions I've ever seen, because Leonucci is a short tenor, which means he is actually a tenor in timbre, but he does not have the highness of a tenor. That's why he does baritone repertoire, and no one should ever do the same. His Amonasro and any baritone role that he does, to be honest, is weak. There are no low notes, they're inaudible, so he screams, he yells, and he barks, and that is not good at all. No. There is no, nuance, there is no emotional singing, he just barks through the role. Ramfis is Khairov, I love his Ramfis, but the king here is Ruggero Raimondi. I've mentioned already how he's not a bass, and no, it just doesn't do the role justice at all, even if it's a small role. Bardo's conducting is not especially bad, but with this kind of a cast, you really can't, do yourself justice, can you? So, our final category, great recordings of excerpts from AIDA. We start from a recording from 1936, with Victor de Sabata conducting the Wiener Staatsopera Orchestra. Here we have 5 excerpts, which are Celeste Aida, Questa si sa che ho vesto, O Patria Mia, and Por ti rivego, plus the end of that. So throughout these 5 excerpts, we hear the Aida of Maria Nemeth, the Radames of Jussi Björling, and the Amonasro of Alexander Sved, with the exception of Björling, who is a household name. Nemeth and Sved are both incredibly underrated artists. Maria Nemeth was the leading Aida of the 30s and 40s, without a doubt, and here we can hear her do the title role live. Although the high C phrase in her O Patria Mia is cut out, you can still hear that she interprets the role with a great deal of psyche. Her gleaming, kind of crystalline voice is a very suitable one for Aida. Björling delivers his aria and duet with Aida with great vocalism, with shimmering top notes, and it's much better than the ones he did in studio, who just kind of inhibit the kind of gleaming quality of his voice instead of focusing on his marbly middle tone. But here you can hear that Björling indeed sounded, shimmering in-house. Alexander Sved is a very great Amonasro. He is a very great Scarpia as well. He sounds, noble, but wild. It takes a baritone like Bastianini or Merrill to sound wild, unrestrained, with a nobility, with a noble quality in the voice. Alexander Sved does that, so it is a very good recording. Of course, De Saba is one of my favorite conductors. He is up there with Toscanini in terms of Italian conducting, and he does a great deal here as well. The next one is from the following year, on also 1937. Again, the conductor is Victor de Sabata, but this time it's the orchestra and chorus of La Scala. Gina Signa is Aida, Beniamino Gilli is Radames, e Bestignani is Aneris, e Torrenava takes the role of Amonasro, and Tancredi Passero is Ramfis. Now, Signa is a soprano with a gleaming top, but also noted for her caprino, her very rapid vibrato. One might consider that a vocal flaw. It doesn't, bother me too much though, because it to me is an indication of the tension, the nervous and sensitive quality of the role of Aida, and she gives out that impression. It is well sung. Her high notes are all there. Gilli's Radames I've talked about. Stignani's Amneris, yes, I've talked about. Torrenava is a weak Amonasro, I would say. not a fan of, and not convinced at all by his interpretation here. But the Sabata is his usual self here. He conducts fabulously, with flowing tones, big sounds, um, you know just he reads the score, he reads all the details, and that's not what you get in a lot of Italian conductors. It is a great reading of Verdi's nuances and details. So we have here Carlos' second night as AIDA in Mexico 1950 under Guido Picco. That was from 30th May, and this is from 3rd June. It has the same cast as a few days earlier, obviously. So why include this? Because, simply, Carla sings the high C in O Patria Mia pianissimo, and by doing so, she records the single best interpretation of this absolutely beautiful aria written by Verdi that has ever existed and heard by mankind. Simple as that. Next, another Callas performance from 1950. Again, these are just excerpts, but this time it is from Rome. It is a recording of the Act 3 Nile scene with Callas singing Aida, of course, Radames is Mirto Picci, and Raffaele De Falci is Amonasro. Now, De Falci, what a baritone. He is one of the authentic Italian baritones, Italian Verdi baritones that has ever graced the stage, and he is incredible. He sings without much restraint. It is a open, direct, and wild voice. It is one of the Amonasros that is so, hair-raising that it can compete with Tadei's interpretation in Mexico. Carlos, of course, does sing Aida very well here, including the duet with Amonasro, in which she displays a lot of vocal coloring, a lot of emotion. The chest voice is there. Her duet with Mirto Picci, who is not a bad Radames, although a bit cardboard sometimes, is also very well sung with adequate high notes and adequate vocalism. She also sings quite the high C here in O Patria Mia, albeit not pianissimo, but who cares? It's a good recording, and it is conducted by Vincenzo Bellezza from Roma 1950 again. Anyway, here comes the last recording in this video. It is from 1951 from Rio de Janeiro. The conductor is Antonino Votto, Renata Tebaldi is Aida, Radames is Mario Filippeschi, Amneris is Elena Nicolai, and Amonasro is Paolo Silveri. This is, without a doubt, Tebaldi's best Aida. Her Ritorna Vincitor here is on par with the Callas 51 as the best recording of this aria ever. Her chest voice here is amazing in Ritorna Vincitor, and then not to mention the Act 3 Nile scene, where she delivers a gleaming high C in her aria, and her duet with Filippeschi is again sung incredibly with a pianissimo B flat, top B flat. That is incredible. She did not replicate that in her other recordings to such an extent, I would suggest. Let's take a look at the rest of the cast. Mario Filippeschi is one of my absolute favorite Radames. He does not have the nuance, the pianissimi, the diminuendo of Corelli, but he has a sword-like voice that penetrates through the orchestra, and for a warrior like Radames, that is what you want. In Celeste Aida, it is an amazing rendition of this aria. He sings all his 3 B flats in the aria with full voice, holds them for, an eternity. A sharp, sword-like voice that just cuts through the orchestra, cuts through your ears, and what a voice. It is absolutely stunning. And in his duet with Tebaldi, he keeps that, temperament, that sword-like temperament, which just shows the warrior side of Radames that we all too often ignore. Elena Nicolai is an amazing mezzo. As I'm nervous, unfortunately, her judgment scene is not here, but we can hear from the trio and her duet with Radames that she is a mezzo with a very beautiful, round, warm, and a very marble-like voice, a very expressive singing. Nicolai is one of my favorite mezzos, and her Amneris here is very well sung. Paolo Silveri is one of the baritones who can, either sing very softly, very expressively, or sing very barbarically and wildly. Here he does both, and that speaks for itself. And this, all in all, is a very, very good recording of AIDA, although it's just some excerpts. So anyway, it's been a pleasure talking to you and making this video, and I hope to see you soon in my next video. Peace out.